Everyone in that diner ignored the old man sitting by the window. They thought he was just another forgotten soul, mumbling to himself, lost in time, smelling faintly of medicine and loneliness. No one knew his name. No one cared. But when a young black waitress stopped, smiled, and held his trembling hand, everything changed, because the man everyone pitied wasn't just a lost veteran, he was a billionaire, one who had been searching for a reason to live again. And that morning, inside a small-town diner in Ohio, he finally found it. The old man by the window. The morning crowd buzzed inside Maple Diner, a small-town restaurant off Highway 27 in Ohio. The scent of brewed coffee and bacon filled the air as laughter echoed from the corner booths. But in the farthest seat by the foggy window, an old man sat alone, silent, trembling slightly, his faded army jacket hanging loose on his shoulders. No one really noticed him. The waitress walked past him twice, the cook shouted orders, and customers joked about football. He didn't fit anywhere in that morning chaos. His silver hair was messy, his eyes clouded, lost, like he was searching for a memory that refused to return. Table 6 needs a refill, Kiana, called out Marla, the head waitress. I got it, Kiana Brooks replied, balancing a coffee pot in one hand and a tired smile on her face. She was in her late 20s, warm eyes, dark curls tied back, her name tag half scratched. She'd been working double shifts for weeks, saving money to move her mother to a better apartment. When she reached the old man's table, she noticed his hands were shaking as he tried to butter a piece of toast. The knife slipped and clattered to the floor. A few people turned, frowned, and went back to eating. Let me help you with that, Kiana said softly, bending down to pick up the knife. He blinked, confused. Do I know you? He asked, voice weak and trembling. No, sir, she smiled gently, but that's okay. You don't have to. He looked down at his plate. They keep changing the staff here, he mumbled. I used to come here with my wife. Or maybe it wasn't here. I can't remember. Kiana felt something tug at her chest. She'd seen lonely customers before, but there was something different about this man. A kind of deep sadness that didn't just come from age. It came from being forgotten. Across the diner, a couple of teenage boys snickered. Hey, the old guy's talking to himself again. One whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. The manager gave a tired sigh but didn't interfere. Kiana clenched her jaw. She wanted to say something, anything, but she knew it would only make a scene. So she turned back to the man, poured him fresh coffee, and smiled again. He looked up, his gray eyes flickering for a moment with something clear, almost recognition. You remind me of someone, he whispered. She used to hold my hand when I couldn't find my way home.
Kiana's breath caught. That's sweet, she said softly. He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. She promised me she'd never let me get lost. For a moment, Kiana placed her hand gently over his, warm against cold. And just like that, the diner noise faded. The laughter, the orders, the clinking dishes, everything went quiet in her mind. It was just an old man lost in the fog of his own mind, and a young woman who refused to look away. Outside, rain began to fall against the window, soft, steady, cleansing. Kiana didn't know it yet, but this simple act, holding the hand of a forgotten veteran, was about to change her life forever. The rain outside turned heavier, streaking down the glass like silver threads. The old man's reflection blurred in the window, half ghost, half memory. Kiana still hadn't moved her hand. It felt wrong to pull away. She could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, the quiet desperation in his touch, like he was holding on to the last familiar thing left in the world. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, his voice breaking. I don't know where I live. Kiana blinked. You don't? He looked lost, terrified, and small. They said my son was coming to pick me up, but he never came. Maybe I waited in the wrong place again. Her throat tightened. Alzheimer's. She'd seen it before her grandmother had it too, before she passed. The confusion, the fear, the way every day erased the one before it. Don't worry, Kiana said softly. You're safe here, okay? I'll help you. But not everyone shared her compassion. From behind the counter, Marla frowned. Kiana, honey, table 7's been waiting on their check for 5 minutes. You can't babysit every old-timer that walks in here. Kiana bit her lip, nodding reluctantly. I'll be right there. When she turned back, the old man was staring down at his coffee, whispering to himself. She caught pieces of his words. Lillian, the garden. Don't let go. Kiana wrote something quickly on her notepad and slid it toward him. I'll be right back, okay? He squinted, read it, and gave a faint, grateful smile. Minutes later, she came back with a slice of apple pie, warm, fresh from the oven. On the house, she said cheerfully. He blinked. For me? Of course. You earned it, didn't you? He smiled faintly. Used to love pie. My wife baked every Sunday. She'd always hum that old song. He trailed off, lost again. Kiana hummed softly, guessing. You are my sunshine. My only sunshine. His eyes widened. A tear slipped down his cheek. That's it, he whispered. That's her song. At that exact moment, the bell above the diner door jingled. A man in a tailored coat stepped inside, expensive shoes, slick hair, Bluetooth in his ear. He scanned the room impatiently, then froze when his eyes landed on the old man. Kiana noticed the change immediately, the stiff posture, the flash of discomfort. "Sir," she said, approaching him. "You looking for someone?" The man sighed. "Yeah, him," he pointed to the old man by the window. "Name's Henry Whitaker." He wandered off from the nursing facility again. Kiana's heart sank. "He's been here for hours. No one came for him." "Yeah, well, he does this," the man replied coldly. "Thinks people still care. The staff called me, but I had meetings." Meetings, the word hit her wrong. She glanced back at Henry, who looked at the stranger like he'd never seen him before. "Who are you?" he asked softly. The man sighed again, embarrassed. "I'm his son," he muttered. "At least I used to be." For a moment, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Kiana looked at the man, expensive suit, watch gleaming, phone buzzing, and then at Henry, frail and trembling with tears still on his cheeks. And for the first time, she wondered how a man could have everything and still leave his father sitting alone in the rain. The diner had grown quieter. The lunch rush was over, leaving only the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of rain against the glass. Henry Whitaker sat still, his hands folded neatly over the napkin Kiana had given him. Across from him stood the man in the tailored coat, his son, Daniel Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Holdings, one of the biggest construction firms in Ohio. "Dad, we've talked about this," Daniel said, lowering his voice, frustration creeping in. "You can't just walk away from the home. It's not safe." Henry frowned. "Home? That's not my home. My home had a porch swing. My wife made lemonade. That was 50 years ago," Daniel muttered. Kiana, who was quietly wiping the counter, froze mid-motion. There was something about Daniel's tone, cold, almost rehearsed. She couldn't help herself. She walked over. "Sir, maybe he just needed some fresh air," she said gently. "He wasn't hurting anyone." Daniel turned to her, his jaw tightening. "You don't know the situation, miss." "Maybe not," she replied calmly. "But I know he's scared." Henry blinked up at her, eyes watery. "Am I in trouble?" Her heart broke a little. "No, sir. You're not." Daniel exhaled sharply and rubbed his forehead. "Dad, come on. Let's go." "I have a car outside." Henry didn't move. "Can she come?" he asked suddenly, pointing at Kiana. Daniel's face flushed. "No, Dad, she works here." "Let's go." But Henry wouldn't budge. He clutched Kiana's hand tightly. "You're kind," he said softly. "People don't hold hands anymore." Kiana knelt beside him. "You'll be okay, Mr. Whitaker." Daniel sighed again and stepped aside to answer a call. His voice lowered, but Kiana caught fragments. Estate papers. Trust transfer? Next quarter." Something about the words made her uneasy. When Daniel returned, he said briskly, "Dad, the driver's waiting." "Let's go." Henry turned to Kiana again. "Can I come back here?" "Of course," she smiled. "Anytime." He squeezed her fingers one last time. "You're a good soul?" "My wife used to say you can tell a person's heart by how they treat someone who can't remember their name." And then he was gone, guided out into the rain by a son who never looked back. Kiana stood there, heart heavy. She didn't know why, but she felt like she'd just lost something important. As she cleared the table, she noticed something tucked beneath Henry's coffee cup, a crumpled napkin. On it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for not letting me be invisible." She folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. That night, long after closing, Kiana sat alone by the same window where Henry had been. The rain had stopped. The neon open sign flickered weakly, reflecting on the glass. She didn't know it yet, but that napkin, that tiny message of gratitude, would soon lead her into a story that would change everything she thought she knew. About kindness, money, and the power of remembering those the world forgets. Because Henry Whitaker wasn't just another lost veteran. He was a man with a secret, one buried deep beneath the fog of his fading mind. And soon that secret was going to find her. The next morning, she stood at the gates of Whitaker Estate, a sprawling property just outside Columbus. The mansion looked like something out of a movie, towering columns, marble driveway, and a fountain shaped like angel wings. A security guard guided her inside, where she was greeted by a man in his 40s, crisp suit, clean cut, calm eyes. "Evan Carter," he said, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you," she replied nervously. "Is Henry here?" Evan smiled faintly. "He's in the garden. It's where he feels safest." As they walked through the hallways, Kiana couldn't help noticing the framed photos on the walls. Henry in uniform. Henry cutting ribbons at charity events. Henry shaking hands with presidents. He was quite a man, Evan said, noticing her gaze. Built half this state from the ground up? Then came the diagnosis and, well, his world started fading. Kiana swallowed hard. Does his son visit often? Evan's expression darkened. Daniel, not as much as he should. His focus is more on the company now. His father's condition doesn't fit neatly into business hours. They stepped outside into a vast garden where Henry sat beneath a large oak tree, sunlight filtering through the leaves. He looked smaller than before, but when he saw Kiana, his face lit up. There you are, he whispered, smiling. I told them you'd come. Kiana knelt beside him. Of course I did, Mr. Whitaker. He patted her hand gently. You remind me of her, Lillian? She used to sing when it rained? Evan cleared his throat softly. Mr. Whitaker, you said you had something to give Miss Brooks? Henry nodded slowly and pointed to a small wooden box on the table beside him. Inside was a key, an old photo of him and his wife, and a folded document. Kiana looked up, confused. What is this? Henry smiled faintly. A thank you, he whispered, for remembering me. When even my own son didn't. The wooden box felt heavier than it looked. Kiana turned it in her hands, tracing the edges, feeling the faint smell of cedar and age. The key inside was small, brass, worn smooth by time. She lifted it carefully, noticing faint initials etched into it. Huh. Mr. Whitaker, she asked softly, what does this open? Henry's gaze drifted toward the horizon. Something old, he said quietly. Something I locked away before I forgot why. Evan Carter, the attorney, looked uneasy. He mentioned that box for the first time this morning. It's been in the study for decades? I think he wanted you to have it for a reason. Kiana looked between them. But why me? Henry smiled faintly. Because you see people, not problems. The words hit her like a quiet wave. Later that evening, Kiana sat in her small apartment, the key resting on her kitchen table beside the napkin Henry had written on. The city lights shimmered through the window as she replayed the day in her mind. Henry's fragile hands, his voice trembling with something between fear and hope. And that single moment he looked at her and said, You remind me of her. She took out her phone, searching Whitaker estate history. Dozens of results appeared, articles about Whitaker construction, charity work, scholarships, veterans housing. Henry had once been celebrated as one of the most generous men in Ohio. Then the timeline stopped. No new photos. No public appearances. Just silence. Something wasn't right? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. When she opened it, Daniel Whitaker stood there, his expression sharp, impatient. Mr. Whitaker? She said, startled. How did you know where I live? He held up a hand. Relax, I got your address from my father's lawyer. I just came to talk. Kiana hesitated. About what? The box, he said flatly. He gave it to you, didn't he? She crossed her arms. Why do you care? Daniel sighed. Because whatever's in that box belongs to my family. Kiana frowned. He gave it to me. He said it was a thank you. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't understand. My father isn't in his right mind. He confuses people, thinks strangers are old friends. He's sick. You're taking advantage of that. Her jaw tightened. Excuse me? He exhaled sharply. Look, I don't mean to sound cruel, but my father's mind is gone. That key doesn't mean anything. Just leave it alone, okay? He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Kiana spoke. Your father may forget names, but he remembers feelings. And I think you've forgotten both. Daniel paused, his expression unreadable, then walked away. The next day, Kiana returned to the estate, determined to speak with Henry again. But when she arrived, the nurse at the gate looked concerned. Mr. Whitaker's been moved, she said softly. His son requested a transfer this morning. Private care facility out of town. Kiana's heart dropped. Moved? Without warning. The nurse nodded. I'm sorry, miss. We just follow orders. Kiana looked down at the small brass key in her hand. The metal felt warm from her palm, almost alive. She didn't know where Henry was. She didn't know what the key unlocked, but she knew one thing for sure. Henry Whitaker trusted her for a reason, and she was going to find out why. The next morning, the air in Columbus felt colder. The October wind scraped against the buildings, carrying with it the smell of wet asphalt and fallen leaves. Kiana stood outside Whitaker Construction headquarters, staring up at the tall glass building that bore Henry's name in silver letters. It was intimidating. A monument to everything he'd built and everything his son was now running. She clutched the small brass key in her pocket. If Henry trusted her with this, there had to be a reason. Inside, the receptionist gave her a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Kiana said, steadying her voice. "I need to speak with someone about Mr. Henry Whitaker." The woman's expression shifted slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Whitaker Sr. no longer manages company affairs. You'd need to speak with his son, Daniel." Kiana hesitated. The last thing she wanted was another confrontation. "Is there anyone else who worked closely with him? Maybe an assistant?" The woman glanced around, then leaned closer. "Try the archives on the basement level. Henry kept his private office down there for years before Daniel took over. Some of his old personal files might still be there." The basement smelled of dust and paper. The lights flickered weakly as Kiana stepped inside. Rows of old file cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with dates and project names. She searched quietly until something caught her eye. A small wooden door at the back of the room. Hidden behind a stack of boxes. Her heart began to race. She brushed the dust off a small brass keyhole. The size and the engraving matched perfectly. Hands trembling, she pulled the key from her pocket and slid it in. Click! The door creaked open. Inside was a small, windowless study. A single desk sat beneath a lamp covered in cobwebs. On the wall hung an old framed photograph. Henry and a group of soldiers standing beside a half-built structure. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "Whitaker Veterans Foundation -1973. Kiana walked closer. On the desk lay a stack of envelopes, each addressed to Daniel Whitaker. None of them were opened. She picked one up and unfolded it. Henry's handwriting was shaky but clear. "If you are reading this, my son, it means my memory has failed me, but my conscience has not. The money you think belongs to you. It doesn't. Half of everything I built was meant for the families of the soldiers we left behind. If I forget, find this room. If you refuse, someone kind will. Someone who remembers what love looks like." Kiana's breath caught. She sank into the chair, heart pounding. Henry's thank you wasn't just a gesture. It was a choice. He had trusted her, a stranger, to find what his own son had ignored. The key hadn't unlocked a box of treasure. It had opened a confession, one powerful enough to change lives. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the hall, footsteps. She quickly folded the letter back and turned off the lamp. A shadow appeared in the doorway. "Daniel Whitaker?" His eyes locked on the key in her hand. "I told you to stay away," he said coldly. Kiana steadied herself. "Your father wanted the truth to be found." Daniel stepped closer, voice sharp. "You think you know the truth? You have no idea what he's done." But before she could speak, he slammed the door shut behind him, trapping them both in the room filled with secrets. The door slammed shut with a hard thud. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as the old light flickered weakly. Kiana's pulse quickened. Daniel Whitaker stood between her and the exit, suit pressed, jaw tight, eyes full of exhaustion rather than anger. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "Your father trusted me with this key." "You're hiding something, aren't you?" Daniel didn't answer at first. He stared at the old photo on the wall, the one of Henry and the soldiers. "You think he's some saint, don't you?" he said quietly. "You think he built this company from pure kindness?" Kiana crossed her arms. "I think he built it on hard work and love for people who served with him." The letter said, he cut her off. "The letter said nothing you understand." He turned toward her, eyes burning. "You have no idea what it was like growing up as Henry Whitaker's son." Kiana hesitated. Beneath the sharpness of his words, she heard something else. Pain. Daniel walked to the desk, brushing his fingers across the dusty wood. "You see these letters? I used to watch him write them for people he didn't even know. Soldiers' families, strangers across the country. He gave away everything. And for what? To feel like a hero. Meanwhile, I watched my mother sell jewelry to pay the bills because he'd donated. Their savings." Kiana's eyes widened. "He was trying to help people." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Help?" He forgot his own family. "My mother died believing she wasn't enough." He never even remembered her birthday. He only remembered the war, the one he never stopped fighting in his head. Silence hung thick between them. Kiana looked at the letter again. "But he didn't forget you, Daniel. He left these letters for you. He wanted you to understand." Daniel shook his head. "No, he wanted me to forgive him. And I can't." He leaned against the desk, rubbing his temples. "You think I don't know he's slipping away? I visit him and he looks at me like I'm a stranger. Do you know what that feels like?" Kiana's voice softened. Yes, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. Every day she forgot who I was. But sometimes she'd hold my hand and I'd feel she still knew me, just not with her mind. With her heart. Daniel's expression faltered, the cold mask cracking slightly. Your father doesn't need forgiveness, she continued gently. He needs someone to remember the good he tried to do, even if he did it imperfectly. Daniel looked at the floor, silent. After a long pause, he said quietly, that key you're holding. It's not the only one. There's another. Kiana blinked. Another? He nodded slowly. He gave one to me years ago. It opens a safe deposit box. I never looked inside. I couldn't, maybe you should. Her heart raced. Why me? Daniel looked at her, his voice low and steady. Because he trusts you. And maybe I need to learn why. For a moment they stood there, two people bound by the same man's fading memory, trying to make sense of the pieces he left behind. Finally, Daniel stepped aside and opened the door. Come on. If we're going to find out what my father was hiding, we do it together. Kiana exhaled, clutching the brass key tightly in her palm. Somewhere, she thought, Henry? Whitaker might be sitting quietly in a care home, lost in his memories, but smiling, because the two people he'd left behind were finally beginning to understand each other. The next morning, the city was still waking up when Kiana met Daniel outside the First National Bank of Columbus. The sun had barely risen, washing the skyline in pale gold. Neither of them spoke much on the drive. The tension was quiet, not hostile but heavy with something unspoken. Daniel held a thin envelope. The second key's inside this, he said as they walked in. Dad gave it to me on my 21st birthday. Said I'd know when to use it. My mind is fading, but before it goes completely, I want whoever finds this to understand, the money was never mine to keep. When I returned from war, I lost brothers who never got a chance to live. This company, this fortune, it was supposed to build homes for their families. Daniel's throat tightened. He flipped to the next page. There, stapled inside, were bank documents showing a secret account under Henry's name, containing millions of dollars. Each withdrawal marked with the words Housing Project Fund. Kiana whispered, he was still donating. Even after he was diagnosed, Daniel swallowed hard. I thought he forgot everything. Turns out, I was the one who forgot who he really was. At the bottom of the notebook was a final note written shakily, as if Henry had struggled to hold the pen. If I can't finish what I started, let the person who still remembers kindness carry it on. Daniel looked up, eyes glassy. He meant you. Kiana shook her head. No, he meant us. For a moment, neither spoke. The air in the vault seemed to hum softly, the sound of something bigger than both of them finally being understood. Daniel reached for the velvet pouch. Inside was a small gold pin, a military insignia engraved with Henry's initials and the date, 1969. He held it in his palm, silent. He wore this every day when I was a kid, he murmured. Said it reminded him who he was before the world got loud. Kiana smiled softly. Maybe it's time you wear it now. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, his expression wasn't defensive or angry. It was grateful. He slipped the pin into his jacket pocket. Let's finish what he started, he said quietly. The Veterans Village. We'll rebuild it. Kiana nodded, her eyes shining. For him. For everyone forgotten. As they stepped out of the bank, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting warm light on both of them. Two strangers connected by the memory of a man who refused to let kindness be forgotten. Somewhere, far away, Henry Whitaker sat by a window in his care home, humming softly. He didn't remember names anymore, but he could feel peace in his chest, as if something he'd lost had finally been found. Kiana stood beside it, a hard hat tucked under her arm. She looked out at the stretch of dirt that would soon become homes for forgotten heroes. The morning air smelled of wet soil and paint, the scent of hope. Daniel walked up behind her, clipboard in hand. First foundation gets poured Monday, he said. We've got investors, volunteers, even local vets helping out. Kiana smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. It's happening, isn't it? Daniel grinned faintly. You made it happen. She turned to him. No, he did. We just listened. In truth, it had taken every ounce of courage to get here. After discovering Henry's notebook, they'd contacted the Veterans Affairs Department, local reporters, and even Henry's old construction company. Once the story hit the news, Forgotten Billionaire's legacy revived by Waitress. Support poured in from across the country. Old soldiers came forward, some in wheelchairs, some in uniforms that no longer fit. Each with stories about Henry. They remembered his generosity, his laughter, and how he always said, We don't leave our own behind. Kiana spent her days coordinating volunteers, ordering materials, and signing paperwork she didn't fully understand. Nights, she'd sit by Henry's bedside, reading aloud from his notebook. He rarely responded, but she swore sometimes, just sometimes. His hand squeezed hers a little tighter. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel found her in the half-built community center, sitting on a pile of lumber. "You ever think about what happens after this?" he asked softly. Kiana tilted her head. "After we finish?" "Yeah," he paused, looking around at the wooden frames rising from the earth. "After we've honored him? After we've done the right thing?" "What then?" She smiled sadly. "Then we keep doing the right thing. Because that's what people like him teach us. You don't stop when the story ends?" Daniel nodded slowly. "You sound like him?" Kiana chuckled. "Maybe I just listened long enough to remember what matters." A gust of wind blew through the open beams, scattering sawdust in golden swirls. For a second, Kiana closed her eyes and could almost hear Henry's voice in the wind. "Kindness isn't charity, child. It's memory. It's how we stay human." When she opened her eyes again, Daniel was watching her. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said quietly. Just thinking how proud he'd be. At that moment, a local TV crew arrived to film progress. The reporter approached, microphone ready. "Kiana Rivers?" she asked. "The woman who helped bring Henry Whitaker's dream back to life?" Kiana blinked, unsure what to say. Cameras flashed. Workers stopped to watch. "I'm just someone who held his hand," she finally said, voice trembling. "He did the rest." The reporter smiled. "And now, thanks to you, a lot of people will have homes." "How does that feel?" Kiana looked out over the field, where new homes would soon rise for veterans no one had remembered. "It feels like he's still here," she whispered. "Like he never left?" Behind her, Daniel placed his hand on the wooden frame of the first house. "We'll call this one Whitaker's Hope." Kiana smiled softly, tears gathering in her eyes. "He'd like that." The camera panned out, catching the rising frames, the fluttering American flag, and the two people standing side by side, the waitress and the son, building something far bigger than either of them imagined. And miles away, in a quiet care home, Henry Whitaker stirred in his sleep and murmured a single word. "Home?" The grand opening of the Veterans Village came on a warm June morning. The sky was spotless, painted in soft blue, the kind of day that felt like a blessing. Rows of newly built homes stood proudly, each painted in quiet shades of cream and gray, American flags fluttering at their doors. The air buzzed with the sound of laughter, cameras clicking and the low hum of pride. At the center of it all stood Kiana Rivers, her waitress uniform replaced by a navy dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone. Behind her, a large banner read, "Welcome home, heroes, the Henry Whitaker Veterans Village." Daniel stood beside her, shoulders straight, eyes glassy with emotion. His father sat in a wheelchair in the front row, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. His gaze drifted from the stage to the sky, lost yet peaceful. Kiana took a deep breath. "I didn't know Mr. Whitaker for long," she began, her voice steady but full of feeling. "But I met him on a day when everyone else looked away. I didn't know his story. I didn't know his name. I just knew he needed someone to see him." The crowd was silent, veterans, families, city officials, all listening. And now, because of him, because of his dream, so many others will be seen too. She looked toward Henry, sitting quietly in the front row. "This village isn't just a place to live. It's a promise that no one who served this country will ever be forgotten again." Applause rose like a wave, rolling across the courtyard. Daniel stepped forward, blinking away tears. "My father built skyscrapers," he said softly, his voice cracking. "But this is the only thing that ever made him truly proud." He turned to his father. "Dad, we did it." For a moment, Henry didn't move. Then slowly, as if fighting through fog, his eyes lifted. "They found Kiana." Something flickered there. "Recognition?" Kiana froze. Henry's lips trembled, and in a faint, fragile voice he whispered, "You held my hand." Her breath caught. She stepped down from the stage, tears spilling freely now. The crowd parted as she knelt beside his wheelchair. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I did," he smiled weakly. "I remember warmth." Kiana took his hand again, squeezing it gently. "You're home now, Mr. Whitaker. You did it." Henry looked around at the new homes, the flags, the families. His chest rose and fell, calm, content. "Good," he murmured. "Then I can rest." And then he closed his eyes. A hush swept through the crowd. Daniel knelt beside his father, one hand trembling on the old man's shoulder. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind, soft, steady, like a heartbeat fading into peace. Kiana bowed her head, whispering, "Thank you for remembering kindness." Later that evening, the sun dipped behind the rooftops, bathing the village in gold. A new bronze statue stood at the entrance, Henry Whitaker, holding a blueprint in one hand, and a young waitress's hand in the other. The plaque beneath read, "Kindness never forgets." Kiana stood beside it, her heart heavy yet full. Daniel walked up quietly, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You know," he said softly, "I think he finally found his way home." Kiana smiled through her tears. "Maybe we all did." As the first streetlights flickered on, children laughed somewhere down the path. A group of veterans sat on a porch, sharing stories. The village was alive, not just with people, but with memory. Kiana looked up at the sky, whispering to the wind, "Rest easy. Henry, we'll keep building." And as the breeze brushed past her cheek, warm, familiar, gentle, it almost felt like a hand